and in this video I'm doing a recreation of Piccadilly Circus, which is in London, just north of Trafalgar Square, and it's the famous place with all the billboards on the side of the building. So I decided to recreate this as close as I could within city skylines. Now that was a challenge in itself. The game wasn't really made to make these type of junctions, and there were some limitations that I had to overcome with just like trickery and movie magic, I suppose you could call it. But this could work in a real city. It would need a lot more maintenance than I put into it. For starters, the traffic lights that I set up were not the best. I'm not very good at setting up traffic lights, and also some of the nodes were way too close to one another, and it was creating a mess within the junction at heavy traffic periods. But I suppose that is fairly similar to real life. In London it is very busy, very traffic heavy. There's a ton of traffic, so at points it may be more realistic than not. So I'm talking about a bit what's going on in the video. I started off using some normal roads, the ones with the sunken roads with the curbs on the outside, but I quickly realised that that wasn't going to work for this design, so I switched to using highway roads. Now what I could have used, which came out pretty much like a day after I finished this, was the invisible road that's just come out. I may end up using that in future builds, but that would have been pretty good for some of these junctions here, just to make it less clippy at points. But the highway road works fine as it is. So I use a lot of different techniques in this build. You saw one right there. I am adding traffic lights to just random areas of the junction to create the full junction itself, because the junction is quite big. And I'm also using Ronix's pavement curbs. You can see here on the video. They are a slightly raised curb with ploppable asphalt on the top, basically, so you can put any decal you want on top of them. They are very useful, very good. They come with all these different shapes and sizes. Obviously, there are probably sizes that I do want that are not there, but they are pretty good. They're a lot better than ploppable asphalt for sizes, because ploppable asphalt you can get 3, and this one you get 5 to 6 different shapes and sizes. It's really nice. It's really nice for making medians and raised curb areas, like in obviously this design. There are no curbs on the side of the road, so I add them all over the junction to make a raised area. The slight problem with that is pedestrians tend to sink into them. They don't sink in at all points, only some. I think it just depends on how high the terrain is at certain points and where people stand. It can look a bit off, but to just get the slight raised look, it is quite nice. The only downside to them is the separation between the top of it and the side isn't high enough. It looks too similar. That's my only thing I don't like about it. So as you can see there, for the traffic lights, obviously I had a pedestrian road connecting it to make the traffic light, but the traffic light had these concrete bits in them, and ploppable asphalt doesn't work because they're slightly raised. So what I did was sink the junction down ever so slightly, so that it was lower than the ploppable asphalt on the other road, and just put ploppable asphalt over the top. It worked quite nicely and it filled in the gap. The only problem is with that is you need to make sure you don't sink it too far, otherwise when cars drive over they will dip down into the ground to follow the road. That's the only downside, but if you just don't do it that much, you get a nice look out of it. So here I'm using a different type of crossing. In Piccadilly Circus they have these darker crossings that are marked by the traditional dotted lights which indicate there's a crossing that are on the road. I think they might be cat's eyes, not 100% sure. They're probably crossing cat's eyes or something like that. But I use this and it looks quite nice. It looks fairly similar to the ones in Piccadilly. The only difference is in Piccadilly they are slightly a darker brown, not really this light colour that you see here. I did originally think about sinking them, like, because they are decals, into the ground slightly, so they would look less vivid. But in the end, I raised them up to just give them a bit more like texture and feel that they are there. I'm designing some arrows here to just show where you drive, because there is a bus lane to stop people crossing over, and it just guides people the correct way to go. So we skipped ahead because I was doing that yellow box junction, but I tried something different and it took longer than expected, so I cut it. But simply put, I made the box junction and then watched where cars went and sunk certain parts of that into the ground to effectively create wear on the yellow box junction. Because in box junctions you tend to see wear where people have been driving over the junction, and this sort of just fit in nicely. I think I'm going to have to use this in a lot more places. So getting onto the buildings. I know, they look very French. They look extremely French. That is because they are French buildings. But I couldn't get buildings that looked like they do in Piccadilly that are UK style. So this was the closest I could get. So basically this is French Piccadilly, as some people have been calling it. But they're a lot nicer than some of the UK ones that don't really fit this area. There's a couple of old Georgian houses which would be nice in an area that wasn't here, because they're not very ornate. And if you look at Piccadilly on Street View, there's a load of ornate buildings and like Gothic architecture. It's very nice, but there's just no UK style buildings, so I had to go with French. So I'm sorry about that. So now we're getting on to the designing of the billboard area. Now this looks quite nice. It ended up looking okay. If I ever did it again, I would probably just like more different billboard signs, and maybe some that were there in real life, because I ended up using just ones that were on the workshop, like these billboards that show off creators and YouTubers, which is always good. I like to show people off. There's obviously Pete McTavish, who is a streamer, and then I put a plain board down, Savania or something, and obviously the man himself, the god, Bloody Penguin. His billboard is up there as well. They also added a Coke building and then a load of movie like posters. The main reason was because this is a curved wall, so I couldn't really make a curved one with those giant billboards, because it didn't really work. What would be nice is a animated curved billboard, because animated stuff can be done now. So if you could have a giant, even like a modular billboard where you could have a flat piece, a curved piece, and maybe some smaller flat pieces that show adverts on them, that would be very nice. But this works just as well. So here I am trying to work out the rigging that holds the board onto the building. I use some curves to outline the edges of the tops and in between some of the smaller billboards, just to add a little bit of difference between them. I also add this scaffolding along the top, because after looking at it in Street View, it literally just looks like scaffolding that is holding these billboards up. And I noticed that I put mine way too close to the buildings, because in real life they are jutting out from the buildings and supported by scaffolding. So that is what I do. I add these scaffolding at the bottom here. The only problem is it's a bit high. These buildings are a tiny bit tall. I should have gone with shorter buildings, but I thought they were going to be too short, but in the end they were just too tall. But it worked out quite nice. It fit in with the style The build itself is slightly bigger than in real life, just because 1, the Skyline scale's messed up, 2, I'm not very good at scaling things correctly, 3, I'm just not very good at scaling things correctly. That's pretty much it. So here I am adding decals to the ground. I use Sparks decals. They fit in quite nicely. They look very similar to in real life, if not a bit similar. In real life, maybe they have a couple browns thrown in. But now I am doing some street signs that are on the ground. I believe this is Regent Street, so I'm using the faded props just to write out words. It would be very nice to have decals that were the alphabet, so I could just write these out with nice decals that all look very similar. Because as it is, I'm not very good at writing signs with the thing. I'm just not accurate enough to make it look correct. And now we're getting on to pretty much the final part, where I am adding a ton of wear. So when you add wear, you want to add it along the road, following where cars drive, along the curves of the road, and where they turn, you want to add more wear. And just make it look and flow with the junction. I've seen some people who, when they add wear, will just add it in straight lines and then like basically 90-degree angles for turning off different junctions. But what you want to do is slightly sink the wear decal down and just make it flow with the corner. Make it feel like that is where the cars have been driving. You can also add some tyre marks to the ground. This will also add to the wearness of it. If you want, you can sink them down slightly to make them look less like wheel spin marks and make them look more than like where cars have been driving one after the other, because obviously when cars drive they leave rubber on the road, and hundreds and thousands of cars driving on very similar places will leave these dark marks where their tyres have been. I had a couple more like wear marks, a couple more damage marks, but that's pretty much it for this build. It was a very long build for me, but a very short video. So I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.